Right, so welcome to the pen and ink and watercolour tutorial of the boat on the shore, the very broken boat on the shore. Okay, so if you look at this reference, I think the photographer has just made the sky very blue, but for me, I'm really more interested in concentrating on the boat itself. Okay, so for me, that's the focal point. And if you're going to make your sky that blue, it's going to take the focal point away from your boat. So I'm going to make sure when I do the sky, I'm going to do a very light wash. Okay, so get the colors that you want for your wash ready, so your blues or whatever. So basically it'll just be a blue. I've actually got a cerulean blue, which is sort of the equivalent of what they call a sky blue in your painting. So I'm going to be using that as my initial blue, or you can use cobalt as well. That's also quite a nice color to use if you don't have cerulean. And I'm just going to put a little bit of that down.
Sorry, what did you say? If you don't have cerulean?
You can use cobalt. So you'll see the cobalt and the cerulean are quite similar sort of, the hue itself, if you know what I mean. The blues is quite sort of close, if that, if that makes sense. All right, yeah. So they, it's also a coolish blue. Okay. So if you don't have the cerulean, then you can just use the cobalt. It's also fine. Or you can use French ultramarine. It really doesn't, it's actually not a problem. You know what, unless you're going to make it very dark and you want that specific blue, then you must go, that's like a cobalt blue in the actual reference itself. So, okay, so I'm going to use my, there. Okay, so remember, just when you're going to start off, make sure you mix this and it's quite watered down, unless you want it dark, obviously, as I said. Okay, so I'm going to add a little bit of water to that. And remember, you must have 2 jugs of water. So you must have a clean water, one for to put the wash down, and then a water to actually clean your paintbrushes with. Okay, so just make sure you do have a nice clean one for the water you're going to put down onto your paper, just as water. Okay, so I'm just going to make a good mix here. I don't want it too much because I really don't want it too dark. So I think that will probably be about right for me. It's quite watered down. Because remember, I'm going to put quite a lot of water on my paper. Okay. And also just make a note. You'll notice I've only just done the boat. So I'm just going to make a note with a pencil sort of roughly where the sky ends. You can also change your horizon depending on where you want it to be. But I think I'm going to leave it roughly where it is there. So, or where the water ends. Let's put it that way. Okay. So I'm just going to measure that. Make sure it is straight. Always remember, any horizon line that you've got must be straight, guys. It's very important that, especially even when you're taking a photograph of a boat or something like that, yeah, it's essential that you actually make sure that it is straight. Okay. To put those hills in as well, okay, but in a vague way. If you haven't masked yours out, what you can do is when we do the wash is you can have a little bit of green and that's ready to go to put on there. So what I mean is, if you're going to do the wash and you want those hills to stay very far away and you want them to be nice and soft, you can do it at the same time as you do your sky to keep those lines very soft. If you want to put them in afterwards, once the wash is dry, you can do that as well. Okay. All right. So I'm gonna put it down initially, and then I'm gonna put my mountains in afterwards. All right. Okay. So there's my blue ready to go, and now I'm going to use a mop brush. So I've got a nice big mop brush, and I'm going to be using that to wet my whole piece of paper. And when you're going to be putting your color on, you can also use the mop brush. If you're going to make it nice and light, you can actually just use your mop brush to pick up the color afterwards as well. Otherwise, what you must do is you must have another big brush ready to put your color on. Okay, so you can use it to do it either way. So I'm going to start bringing in my water. And I'm just going to take it up to that line there. And I'm going to make it quite wet because I don't want it to be too dark, so I'm making it quite wet. I have got my paper at a very slight angle, just more for so that you can see a little bit better on your side. But it's not so much of an angle that it's actually going to run down. Okay, so I'm just going to make sure that the water stops where I want it to stop. So I'm literally just going to pick up my other small paintbrush. So you see, you don't have to mask your line out here. You can actually just put the water up to there, and if you're careful enough, you won't have a problem with the wash going over the line there. Okay, I'm actually using a slightly different paper to the last time. This is more of a textured paper. I just thought for a change I want to do something slightly different. Okay, so it's nice and wet, and it must be wet, so make sure there aren't any dry patches when you put your color down. Just look from the side, just check from the side. Okay, now I'm going to pick up directly my paint, just dabbing that straight into the paint like that, and I'm going to just start doing a wash across.
Is your brush being quite wet?
No, well, it's already wet anyway
already
from the
wet from
wash,
the-
yeah. Okay, so you can just do your wash there. Sorry, and that's the only problem is if you do have any bits of lying there, it is going to sit on your paper, so that is a bit of a problem. Okay, so there you can see it's going to be very light when it comes through, but that's as dark as I want it. It's actually going to get a little bit lighter. And now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab a tissue, and I'm going to sort of bring in some of those clouds there, just using the tissue and dragging out some of the color. Can you see there? Just softly, just bringing in some of those clouds there. So just erasing some of it. Because it's so nice and wet now, I can actually do that quite easily. Try and get rid of that hair there. Okay, and then you can bring in clouds wherever you want. I mean, you don't have to stick to the picture. There we go. Just remember, any clouds that you have right at the horizon there will be a bit thinner because they're quite far away. So you can bring in some clouds there. There we go. Just like that. There we go. Like so. And if you find there's any blobbiness that you don't want there, you can just soak that up. So just go into the white area that you've drawn there. Or not drawn, that you've just painted in. So I'm using a slightly coarser paper, and you can actually see now when you look at it how the paint is actually sitting in the texture of the paper. Can you see that it's giving it a bit of a texture, which I actually wanted. That's the reason I picked this paper. I didn't want the very, very smooth paper. Okay, and then I just want to soften those edges slightly. You can even use your finger if you really wanted to, you know what I'm saying? You can actually use any tool that actually works. All right. That's it. Yeah. And then just leave it. All right. So remember, don't overwork it. Just don't want any very dark sort of blobs there. So I'm just going to pick up that paint that's sitting right there. And I find for me, this is a perfect wash. I've done obviously more complicated washes when it comes to skies and stuff like that, but for this that's absolutely perfect. Okay, so now I'm going to let that dry. If you want to do a bit of a wash for the sand, you're welcome to do that now as well, because your boat has already been covered with your masking fluid, so it's already been masked out. Okay, so if you want to bring in a wash, you can, but just remember to make it very light, because you want to bring in some of the texture of the sand as well. Okay, so if you look at that sand, you'll see there it's got some sort of texture. If you don't want to bring in the wash now and you want to rather bring in those colors, so I'm going to bring in the colors later on after I've done the boat. So I'm going to bring in some of the little textures with my pen and ink, and then I'm going to take some water and I'll actually put it over the areas that I want to put the color on, and then I'm going to put my paint in after that. Okay, so I just did this whole thing just in case I change my mind, which I can do while I'm busy painting. Okay, so now the sea part is the next part that you're going to do, but you need to wait for this to dry, because if you try and do this now, it's going to bleed into that. So what you can do, if you your C is directly over there. Okay, does that make sense? So it comes right up to the top there. So what you want to do here now is wait for this to dry. You can go and grab a hairdryer if you want to, and you can just dry it with a hairdryer quickly. Then you can just take a little bit of masking fluid if you want to. You don't have to, because it is at an angle here, and you can actually do this quite easily, but it has to be dry, because as soon as you put the blue of the sea in there, it's going to bleed into that paint, because that paint is wet. If it's dry, you're not going to have a problem. Okay, so it is taking a bit of time to dry, so I'm just going to grab the hairdryer quickly. Okay, so this shoreline, if you don't want it skew like that, you can actually just make it straight, but that's entirely up to you. Okay, so I'm going to keep it a skewness because I quite sort of like it. But what I'm going to do is I'm not going to make it come off exactly where the boat ends over there. I'm going to bring it a little bit closer. They always say never make it join up completely. It just makes for a nicer painting. So I'm just going to draw the shore in like that, just like that. There we go. Okay, there we go. Right, now we're going to put the sea in. Okay, so now obviously the sea can be a little bit darker, so you can use exactly the same color, because remember your sea will reflect the color of your sky. So you're not going to use a totally different color to the sky itself. You must always use a similar color or a similar sort of hue. Okay, so I'm going to stick with the cobalt. No, sorry, I used the cerulean, so I'm going to stick with the cerulean. I'm going to make it a little bit darker this time. All right, so the reason I've asked you to get an earbud is if you haven't done this already. Okay, so if you haven't got any masking fluid, what you do is you're going to put your paint on that area. So you're going to first wet it. So if you don't have any masking fluid, you can also wet it even if you have got masking fluid. Have your paint ready to go. Okay, so you can just watch what I'm going to do here. Just put this on the side. Sorry, these are those things you can use for putting on masking fluid, by the way, ladies. This is the stuff I couldn't find last time. So these little rubber things, it's actually for painting and putting paint on and dragging through the paint. But it works perfectly for putting on masking fluid, because you get different shapes, and the masking fluid obviously doesn't stick to it. Okay, so it's easy to clean. All right, so those are quite handy. All right, so what you can do now is you're going to take just a wet paintbrush, a small paintbrush, and you're going to just wet the area where your water is like that. Okay, up to that area. If it does go over, you just grab your cotton bud and you actually just quickly clean it. Okay, so you can have the cotton bud a little bit wet and you can just clean the paint off the area that it's come into. So you can actually scrub it out. Then I'm just going to grab the paint and I'm just going to drag it. Remember to follow the same direction of the sea as you have it. Okay, so you can see this is quite wet. It's gone a little bit wetter than I actually wanted, but it's fine. Then you can actually just wipe it out a bit there if you want to. So you can drag this through the paint as well, just to take some of it off if you want to. Yeah, just take the earbud, yeah. Okay, you can just make it as dark as you want it. There we go. Okay, you can see why I made it dry over here, because otherwise if it was wet it would actually bleed into that. Okay, so then I'm going to do the same on the other side. Just wet the area that I want. I don't want to actually make it too wet. I made it too wet now this last time. So just remember to only go up to your horizon. So I'm just going to dampen the paper slightly. I don't want to make it quite so wet. So not as wet as when I did that wash just now. Just up to the boat. Where I want that blue, and then I'm just going to grab the watercolor, and remember to follow the same direction as your water, so don't go up and down, you must go side to side. It's exactly like you do with charcoal or any drawing. Painting is the same way. You always use the brush strokes in the same direction of the object that you're busy drawing, painting. Okay, just work. That's why it is better to have a little bit of water on your actual paper, because it just makes it easier to sort of get those lines. That's fine, just like that. I'm just going to leave it like that. Don't overwork it. Just make sure you don't have any lines going down. Okay, so that's perfect, just like that. That's the exact color I was looking for. Okay, just like that. There we go. Right. If you want to give more of a watery effect, what you can do is you can just grab the tip of a smaller paintbrush if you want to, and then just drag it through the water as well, you know, so you can just get that sort of feeling of the water. So you can do that as well while it's still damp. You can just do that, you know, almost give it slightly different tonalities, you know, so that you can almost see that it's not just a flat surface. You can even do it on that side. You can even pick up a little bit of water and drag some lines into it if you want to, but you don't have to. You can just leave it as it is. So you can actually play around a fair amount. There we go, that's it. I'm going to leave it just like that. Okay. Alright, I'm not going to do the bottom now. Okay, if you want to do just a vague brownish wash, you can do that now before we go into the boat. Alright, so what you're going to do there is you're not going to have just to have one color, you're going to have more than one color. Okay, so you're going to have a lighter brown and a sort of a darker brown. So just get those sort of sandy colors that you're looking for, because what you're going to do here, because you want to keep that sort of soft feel of the sand, is you're going to put water over that whole area, and then you're going to pick up those, say, 2 different colors, and you're just going to drag them into there to get that sort of sandy effect. Okay. What I'm going to do in the meantime is I'm just going to take off my masking fluid, but I'm just going to dry it, especially over here. Just remember, if you take your masking fluid off and your paint is still wet here, it's going to tear your paper. Okay, so make sure you dry where the masking, at least where the masking fluid is. Alright, so I'm going to quickly just dry mine before I pull it off. Right, and then I'm just going to start peeling off my masking fluid as well. Remember, when you do peel your masking fluid off, just work towards the inside of your picture, you know, towards the masking fluid. Don't work away from the masking fluid, because sometimes this paper can tear when you do that. It just depends on what sort of paper you've got. And remember, you can still bring your masking fluid in. So say, for instance, now you're working on your boat, okay? And there's a section in the boat here. So say you want to do a wash over this area of the boat. Okay, now you wouldn't be able to do it before now because you've been busy with the sky, etc. So now you can take your masking fluid and you can mask out any areas that you want to keep white, okay? And then you put your wash of the color of the hole that you want over it, and then you take your masking fluid off, and then obviously you've still got your white areas left. All right, so that's your, you don't have to just use the masking fluid right at the beginning, you can use it throughout your picture. Okay, so say for instance you were going to do this whole boat, that blue for instance, or whatever, or those 2 blues together like that. You could actually just mask out that white line there, and then just quickly put the color on, and then you wouldn't have to worry about losing that line. Okay, so you could do things like that. The same with this as well. So you see this little piece of this area over here. You can either paint that directly as it is, okay, or you can actually take some masking fluid and you can mask out little patterns like that. All right, and then you could wet that whole area, okay, and then you could just dab in some colors. So that could actually work very, very well. But I'm basically going to just start off with the boat now. Okay, and I'm going to just use I'm going to use a thinnish pen and a thicker one. I've got quite a few different sizes, but I just tend to use the 2. I find it's actually more than enough. You don't need like 4 different sizes, you know. 2 for me is perfectly fine. And then we'll start off with the thinner one first. I always start off with the thinner one and then go into the thicker one. So I'm going to start actually bringing in some of the textures of the boat. And you'll see a lot of this boat is actually more about the color, not so much about texture. So there are textures in here, So for instance, in the hole over here, you can see there's a lot of texture that you're going to bring in. But a lot of this boat is to do with the color that's in the boat. It's got all these lovely pinks and there's purples, etc. And those are all the colors that we're going to bring into the boat. Okay, but we obviously do want the drawing as well. But it's up to you how much texture you want to bring in. So if you want to bring in more texture into the boat, you can. Okay, if you want a little bit of texture, you can do that as well. So I'm going to start off just with the thin pen, and I'm just going to start sketching the boat in. Okay, just using the thin pen, and then where I want the thicker lines, then I will do the thicker pen. Okay, all right, so I want you guys to just start with your sketches and get going with that. And we're going to first sketch out the whole boat first before we do any painting. Okay, so have fun with your sketching. Like I said as well, it's entirely up to you how much of this detail you bring in here. You can even add a little bit of extra woodiness to the cabin, for instance, or you can concentrate on working with the color. Okay. I know that got back up me. She needs perfect. I can't see anything wrong with it. I don't see anything wrong with it. I look at it, it's just really, really
Okay.
yeah,
Please, I see that, okay?
So especially with this part of the boat over here, I'm going to really bring in some of the textures of the wood, not just with the paint itself, but I actually want to bring in, following the line of the actual boat itself, you know, the hull. And if you feel it needs something extra, you know, like bring in something extra, you're most welcome to do that. So. So I quite like that white stripe, so I'm going to bring that in, but I'm just sketching it in with a pen. And then when I paint it, at least I know where it is, you know. So you'll see there's some like black areas in here as well. You can either put black paint in, or you can just use a thicker pen and then bring in the black areas. Okay, so, but I'm not going to put that in right now. I'm going to first carry on here, bringing in some of this texture that I want. I just want to show you what I'm doing here, where the surface changes direction. Okay, so this is going this way. I'm actually bringing in one or two lines to sort of make you see it better. Do you see what I'm saying? So I'm actually bringing in those, a contour line. It's not really a contour line because it's not round. Okay, that's more of a contour line. But I'm actually using the pen to sort of bring in a few extra lines. Can you see how that immediately gives it more form? Okay, all right, so that section over there, that's what I've done there. And I can do that with these as well. So you can see these lines, they're not quite as strong with that, but I've actually brought those in there so that you can see that surface is sort of flat. But that's just because I want to do more drawing in mine. Okay, but you can also use the paint and the shadows, because remember that's also to do with the way the light is shining on each thing. It also gives it form as well. Okay. All right, but that's, you can also do that as well to make it more definite. Okay, but just don't use it everywhere. So I'm not going to bring lines down here as well, because then I've got too many lines. I like to have a bit of variation of texture as well. So this section over here, which is, it's black in the picture, but I'm not going to make it black because it's going to be too much. Okay, I'd rather use paint, bring the paint in and then make it darker with the paint. So I'm going to sort of just do some cross hatching there just to sort of make it look darker, but I'm not going to make a big black blob there. All right. Okay, you've got to be very careful when you do that sort of thing. Don't ever just make it black, black, black. Rather do it afterwards and make it black if you want to. You know, afterwards if you see, no, actually I can get away with making it pitch black, and you can go ahead and do that. Because you do need contrast, but you also just don't want too much of a contrast either in certain areas. So yeah. But I'm trying to change the textures occasionally here as well, not use the same texture everywhere. Because as soon as you do that, you start losing a feeling, you know. You must always say that the boat could stand alone on its own as a pen and ink sketch as well, to a point. Okay. can also just squint your eyes or stand up and look at it and see if you're starting to get the tonalities correct. Because remember, your paint is going to bring in some of the tonalities. But like for instance, with these little wooden little pegs and things sticking out here, I'm obviously going to bring in that with the actual pen itself. So you can see how the lines that I'm bringing in here start defining the forms, the direction of the lines that I bring in. Okay. And it makes like that little section stand out from the rest of it. Okay. But while you're doing this, just think about, I'm going to be putting color here. Do I need more? Do I need less? So always, sort of keep that in the back of your mind when you're doing this. Sort of you need to almost start planning ahead now about what color you're going to bring in here. So then you decide how much texture you're going to bring in relation to color. So if you feel like for me, that's almost not, I actually don't want to bring in more than this, okay, because it's going to become too much. I'm going to stop, I'd rather bring the colors in on top of this to make the boat really pop. Alright, so I have put a little bit of masking fluid. I don't know if you guys can see properly there, but yeah, you can't really see, but you'll see when I actually put it on. So I sort of tried to make a little blobby sort of pattern like it actually is in the actual reference there. So sort of try to get similar sort of pattern to that. And now what you're going to be doing is you're going to start mixing your colors. Okay. So you can see there's quite a lot of different colors here. There's some sort of a yellow ochre, there's pinks, there's purples, etc. You're not going to need a lot of paint, okay? But you want to try and get that sort of variety of colors there, because to me that's what really makes this boat stand out. All right. So for instance, you see this area over here isn't really it hasn't got a lot of texture to it except for that little bit over there. If you want to get a smoother texture like that, what you're going to do is you're going to mix those two colors, okay, and then you're going to wet that area first a little bit, not a hell of a lot like we did with the background, but you're going to wet that area first, and then you're going to drag those colors into there. So if you ever want a surface where you want it to sort of bleed into the other color, now for instance this section over here as well, you want it to bleed in, so you're going to wet that area first, and then you're going to bring those colors in there, let them bleed into one another. Okay, and you can actually control it to a point. If you make it too wet, it's just going to spread out. Okay, so you want to make it wet but not too wet. Okay, so that you're going to have to also just experiment with and see how it works for you. But remember, it's also a lot about happy accidents. Also remember to leave your white areas white where you want them white. So like that white area there, you're just going to bring a little bit of color. You want to keep some of those contrasts. Remember this white here, you must leave white. You don't have to bring those shadows in if you don't want to. You can if you want to. So do make a note of keeping the tonalities correct, okay, when it comes to the colors as well. All right, okay, cool. So you can start mixing your colors, getting your colors together that you want. I've still got from the last time I did my painting. So I normally just keep it out if I know I'm going to be using those colors again. I don't go and waste my paint, because I use the tubes. Okay, so I'm going to need some more of them. Yeah, so if you want the turquoise, then you must use a cool blue and a cool yellow. So then you can use a phthalo blue. You should be able to use the cobalt, should work quite well. But then you want a lemon yellow mixed in with it to get a little bit of the turquoisey color. Okay, I'm going to use relatively smallish paint brushes because some of the colors are quite small. So I'm not going to use anything much larger than that. You know, obviously some of the surfaces I might use a slightly larger brush to put the water on, but I'm not going to really use much larger brush than that. For me, that's perfect. Perhaps when I do the boat part, the hull itself, I might just use a slightly larger brush. But yeah, you can, I mean, you all basically know how to work with paintbrushes, so I don't think you guys will have a problem there. I'll just find a medium size one for when I do the hull. There we go. Okay, right. Okay. All right, so I'm going to work basically from left to right as well. I just find it's easier, you know, then I don't have to worry about getting paint in the wrong places. So you can start mixing your colors on your, if you want to, you can mix your colors as you go along, or you can go and mix all the colors and have them all ready to go, if that makes sense. So you don't have to do that. You can just mix as you go along. I tend to mix as I go along, but you're also welcome to mix all those colors and get them all sort of ready to go. Okay, but I'm going to start with that sort of darkish section that we were talking about just now, where I wanted to sort of blend in. There you will have to have the colors ready to go though, okay, because you're going to be working wet into wet sort of. Okay, so I'm going to have my blue ready there. And I mean, you can change this as well. I mean, it doesn't have to be exactly the same, guys, really. You can have fun. And remember, if you want a grey, you can either use a Payne's grey, which I have got here already, or you can use, you can make a grey. If you don't have a Payne's grey, you just mix. So you normally mix the opposite of your color wheel, and you add a little bit of the more of the one. Okay, but remember, grey on the whole has a blue base. Okay, but if you want it to be a slightly warmer grey, you're going to add more of the red to the blue. So you can have blue and orange, for instance, will give you a grey. And then if you want to change the grey slightly, you can add a little bit of a yellow to it. Okay, so you can just play around with that. But that's basically how you can get your grey. So I'm just going to make a bluey sort of grey. I don't want it just to be Payne's grey here. So this little section over here. And I'm going to wet it first. So I'm just going to wet just that little piece over here. So I'm just going to wet it there first, because I actually want the colours to bleed in there. And then I'm going to pick up some of my Payne's grey at the bottom there. And remember, you can actually turn your page upside down if you want it to run better. And I'm just going to drag it there. Some of the purples there. So you can see there I've got the colours bleeding into one another, because I wet my surface beforehand. Okay. So you can see how nicely that bled into each other, because I wanted to keep it relatively smooth. Remember, my paper is quite rough, so I'm not going to get a very smooth texture, obviously. Okay, now I'm going to do the next one. So you can see I'm sort of working one section into the other, just so that I don't get too carried away and then I find that I haven't left a white area open, because that can happen very quickly. You know, if you cover one area too quickly, you need to be aware of what you actually want to create. So just be very wary that you don't just cover one area and go, oh crap, I should have actually left that open. And I am trying to stick with the tonalities as well here. I don't want to really go back into this again, okay, so I'll try not to go back into, especially when it comes to doing these little washes like this. You don't really want to go back into it, so you must just be happy with what you've got. Remember, you can go back into it and make it darker if you need to. That's not too much of an issue. Okay, so I've done that piece there now. Now I'm going to go in with these nice bright colors over here. obviously you guys can change the colors here as well. I mean, you don't have to stick to these colors, but I quite like this. There's such a variation of color here, which I love. I think it's awesome, you know. So for instance, I can see here, I want this to be slightly darker and a little bit browner on the brown side. So I'm going to go back into that slightly. So you can go, when it's a small area like this, you can go back into it. Now I'm going to bring those lovely pinks and that into this foreground piece, which I think looks awesome. So it's got pinks and it's sort of got browns. So pinks on the one side and then browns on the other. So I'm going to make sure I've got those colors ready to go. So if you don't have a pink, then you're going to use a sort of a red. You can use either a coolish red. Okay, so this is a warm red, but I just happen to have a warm red here, and I'm going to add a little bit of blue to it. Just see, it'll probably give me more of a purple, but let's just see if I add a fraction of blue to it. Actually, no, that's about the right color. So it was mostly red with a teeny little bit of blue. That's sort of the color I'm looking for that little area over there. It's nice. It's quite nice and intense. If you wanted more orange, you can just pick up some of the burnt sienna. Okay, but that's just me. So I'm just going to have my colors ready there to go. So I'm almost putting them out on my palette as I see them in that little block over there. Just remember, you're going to be adding water to this section over here. Alright, so you want to actually make sure you have got enough paint to actually see the colors. So don't have too little paint. Okay, so I've sort of got the colors that I want here. I'm just going to use the same brush all around. Okay, so I'm going to use clean water and I'm going to make this relatively wet so that it's quite wet there. Okay, and now I'm going to dip in the colors that I want. So the pinks, and you can see now because I've wet it, the pink is going to get lighter, remember, as it dries. So I just want the pink over there, and then I'm going to pick up some of the oranges. And then you can just have fun. You can have that, and then some more orange over this side a little bit. And then I'm going to pick up some of the... I'm sort of drying my paintbrush in between because otherwise it's almost too wet. And I'm going to bring in some of the browns. And you can see I'm actually using quite thick paint here because I want this to be quite dark. You can see it's quite nice and it stands out quite nicely. So I'm almost using the colour on its own straight out of the tube for that, just to keep the darker pieces. And that's already starting to get that feel that I'm looking for. Just dabbing. Okay, and it's definitely sort of dark on the one side and maybe one or two little dark spots over there. Just give it that old. That's it. Basically, that is it. Okay, so you don't want to go more than that, and that's why doing the masking fluid there helped a lot. Because if you had to try and do that now on its own without the masking fluid, it would be a little bit of a problem. But you can. So then you would do it a different way. You wouldn't do it quite the same. What you would do then is you would pick up your paintbrush, have all those colors ready, and then actually just basically paint them in, okay, with the gaps in between, and you leave the gaps behind, okay. But that's where your masking fluid comes in very handy. Now I can sort of see what I maybe want to do with that white piece behind there. So I'll definitely bring those shadows in, because otherwise it looks a bit odd. So I'm just going to but I wanted to do that first to judge how dark I wanted those shadows to actually be, you know, or how intense. Okay, so now I'm going to bring in that detail that I want here. So just remember to put your shadows in the right place. If there's a shadow, put the shadow in and at the right tonality, because that's very important. Otherwise your boat isn't going to have depth. You'll notice if you look at the boat as well, there's definitely a much lighter on the right hand side and then darker to the left. So you must make note of that. So your colors here will be darker because they're in shadow. And not obviously as bright. Okay, so the hue, you know what I'm saying? The saturation is not going to, intensity or saturation, however you want to put it, is not going to be as bright as the brighter areas. So they're all going to be slightly duller, so slightly grayer, and not quite so intense in color. All right, so always make a note of that when you're actually doing those sections. So this part over here, these colors are quite dull, so I'm going to do those. So long I have got all the grays that I need. That's actually looking great. Don't forget to stand up and look at it as well every now and again, guys. Okay, because then you can just see what's going on here. Can you see now why I decided not to do the sky so dark? So when I start bringing these intense colors in here, they're going to really pop. You know, for me, that's more important than the colors themselves, so to speak. You know, well, they are important, but that for me, it's a very, very bright, intense color. And that, to me, the boat almost disappears into that sky, sort of, you know. Oh, I'm just loving these colors in this boat. It really is. They're just so awesome. You know, once you sort of start getting into it, it just becomes a lot easier. You know what I'm saying? You can just, you just start, you know, having fun.
Yeah.
Just remember to leave little bits of white every now and again, because that is what your watercolor is sort of about, you know what I'm saying? And that is difficult to remember sometimes, especially if you're used to painting with oil paints, you know. I haven't wet this part over here where it's more white because I want to keep the white behind, but I don't want to go and do the masking fluid over. So this one I'm actually just putting the paint on where I see it. Okay, you know what I mean? So I'm not masking it out. I'm just putting the little bits of paint that I see there. colour down like that, and say for instance you want to make it lighter somewhere, while it's still wet, you can just take the cotton earbud and you can just rub into it and take some of the paint off while it's still damp. Okay, or you could even use the edge of a tissue or something like that. So you can, turn it down slightly if you want to. So I always have these little tools available just in case I want to change something somewhere quickly before it actually gets to a point of drying. The tonalities right with the shadows and stuff here, but darkening it slightly where I want it slightly darker. Because we've got small areas to work with, it's actually much easier, to do it now. Yeah, so it's when you're starting with big washes and stuff like that and you want to change tonalities, and then it becomes really, really complicated to do. So, but I'm squinting my eyes, I'm making sure I'm getting the shadows in the right place here. And the thing is what you do there is you compare, so say for instance you have this part of the boat here. So this section over here where you've got this lovely section we did with all the mottley stuff. What you do is you compare it to the section next to it, and then you'll know if that's dark enough. If it's not dark enough, you'll see immediately. But you sometimes need to make the comparison. Because what happens is sometimes you get so caught up and you just paint that section, and then you paint that section, but you don't really compare the two. It's important to make sure that you do compare the two. I'm going to do the hole now as well. So I'm going to start on with the hole. With the hole, I think what I'm going to do is like there's a sort of darkish blue over here. I'm actually going to wet the whole, that one little piece there, and then I'm going to bring the colours into that. But I'm not going to make it too wet. And we'll see how that goes. The tricky part here is, if you look at this part of the boat, at the back here, that looks white when you compare it to the blue, but it's not actually white because that's actually white. All right, so it's actually more of a grey. So therefore that has to be a lot darker. Okay, so if you do want to have that sort of feel, you must just remember to take that into account, that your white is actually over here. Okay, so I'm going to make sure I've got my colours ready. I like that, that's quite nice there, maybe a bit more of that. So here I've used some of the cerulean blue, but with a bit of Payne's grey, just to turn it down slightly. So that'll be fine for that part, and then I'm going to use a cerulean blue just for the front section of the boat. Put it separately. This is why I like having a very big palette like this. It just frees you up, to running out of space. Or you can just have a nice big white plate. That also works quite well. Okay. So remember, if you're doing a big piece like this, these pieces are fine because they're quite small. You don't have to stress too much because you've got time to sort of do them, and it's very small. But remember, you're working with watercolor. So when you've got a big section that we're going to do like this, for instance, you need to know what you want to do there. Or you need to have a plan. So you need to think, okay, I'm going to put the water down, I'm going to pick up that color, that color, that color, put it down, and then you just have to leave it. Okay, because especially in big areas like this, you can really overwork them very quickly. All right, so you really need to know how much water do you want to put down, how much paint, how much pigment do you want in there, do you want it very watered down, do you want it darker, etc. So that's very, very important, your plan, especially when it comes to a big section like that. But you also do have to leave it up to the watercolor gods to decide how it's going to turn out. Okay, so let's see what the gods have in store for us here. Okay, so I've got my colors that I want. You can see if you look at my palette, I know you probably can't see it from there, but you can see I've got lots of colors going here, but they're all ready to go. So if I want to put in a little bit of brown or a bit of yellow, then I can. Okay, right. I'll do that part over there afterwards, but I first want to get this piece done. Okay, so just up to that where that white line is, and I'm going to wet that. Just remember, you must just remember where your white line is. And I'm actually going to work from light to dark, so. And that's why I definitely always wet it, as I say, because I want to have that little bit of control where I can go back into it and add a bit more color. Okay. Oops, that was quite a lot of color. Okay, and what helps here is just to squint, because often when you squint you think, oh, actually it looks quite cool, I'm just going to leave it like that. So I'm going to just bring in that dark piece at the bottom here, underneath that white line. There you go. Okay, so I'm quite happy with that. Then I'm going to do the piece underneath the white line. So that's got a piece of that same blue, so I'm going to bring that in first. And then I'll bring in that lovely turquoisey color. So just wetting it. If you find you've made it too wet, remember you can just wait a few moments and then it will automatically just dry out. Okay. Look, you don't have to wet the paper first, but I just find it, to get the sort of wash that you're looking for, you can. But you can also just paint it directly, guys. You really don't have to do the wash if you don't want to. But I almost want that, like, I know it sounds weird, it's really, but like the washed out look. Okay, so. Okay, I'm going to make my turquoise now. I'll do the top of the boat section just now. I just want to get the hole done. Okay, I want to make a turquoise. I've got to get this wet first. So I've got a manganese blue here. So you can just use a cool blue. Oh, this is so dry. Oh, goodness me. I'll add a little bit of yellow to it. bit of that cerulean into the turquoise at the base here, because it needs to get a little bit darker as it gets to the bottom. So then I'm going to start bringing a little bit of a shadow in there, just adding a little of that cerulean in there. And because it's wet, I can do that. And there's like a really weird mix of blues and browns here. So try and get that in there. And now I'm going to start bringing in now, even if it's slightly damp, it's also fine. It just mustn't be sopping wet, but if it's slightly damp, you can do that as well. Now I'm going to start bringing some of those dirty yellow browns into that blue there that I see. You know, there's little, you can't really call it rust, although I suppose it could be. But yeah, just where it's sort of gotten all old and miff. I'm going to do the hole, not the hole, but the hole itself afterwards. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to first finish my hole. You can see what I did was I was steering away from doing that edge part of the boat. I wanted to first do this and then get the other parts in and then decide how I'm going to finish that off, because it all sorts of blends in with one another. So I'm sort of a bit wary to just go in there straight away, just so I've got the right feel, you know. But I'm loving all of these colors blending into one another. I think that it really does work very well. So I'm just bringing in these shadows now. There's some dark shadows here that give the boat a little bit more distinctiveness and also a bit more form. So where I did it with the black pen, you can see why I didn't do any more black pen than I did, because it doesn't need any more than that actually. I mean, later on if I want to, I can bring a few little more cracks into the wood perhaps if I'd like, but I'll see, you know, I'd rather look at it a bit later and then check it out, you know. So before, I don't want to do it right now because otherwise I might be sorry afterwards. So I'm going to rather finish the boat. Okay, so now I'm going to quickly do the beach part, the sandy part. Alright, so I'm just going to quickly get some colours together here. I think I'm going to stick with those sort of colours. Yeah, actually, I think I have got what I'm looking for. I'm sort of going to use the thing as a reference, although there isn't really much to see in this picture. So, oopsie daisy, let me just get that there. It's like, you know, I'm so happy with the rest of it, I don't want to mess it up now. Okay, so I'm going to put water down and let's hope for the best. Okay, there we go. Beak, really loud beak. Okay, now I'm just going to pick up some colours and don't want to make it too dark. So just this is a bit of raw umber. I've actually just sort of mixing the colours I've got on my palette because I don't want it to be all the same colour. But I wanted to show the beachiness there. But this is also just one of those happy accident things, you know, so I'm just going to get the colour down. And then I'm going to quickly put the shadow in as well. So, beak is very loud. Sorry about the parrot in the background, guys. So now I'm just going to bring in that shadow of the... So I'm just using a Payne's grey mixed with a little bit of the brown because it is still the beachiness. So just make sure you get the shadow right. That's a big thing. It mustn't be a completely different shape. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but as long as you've got the feeling there. Because the shadow is actually what gives it some depth here. So yeah, there we go. See there. And then what I'm going to do is on top of this then I'm going to bring in a little bit of texture with the pen and ink, but I'll have to wait for it to dry a fair amount. Where it joins up with the boat at the bottom here, it must be quite dark because it is relatively dark. That's why it needs to be quite wet, otherwise it won't really work. So I'm going to leave it like that for the moment, and then I'll wait and see how it looks, you know, in a day or so. Not obviously this afternoon, but I will get back to it as soon as I can. And then we will see what pen and ink I'm going to be putting in, and then I'll post it at the end of the video. Okay, so cool. So thanks for joining this class. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And until next time, cheers. GoPro, stop recording. Okay, so I'm just going to add a little bit of pen and ink detail into the sand area, to the beach. And I'm going to try and clean that up there because I quite like this sensation of the distance almost of the sea, not the bay like it's actually in the original. So I'm going to try and scrub that out. If I can't, then I will add some mountains into the background. So I'm just going to grab the clean side, obviously, and I'm going to see if I can scrub that out. Oh, there we go. Actually works quite fine. In actual fact, it would be actually quite nice to keep a soft distance of the ocean there. It actually works quite nicely. There we go. Then here I've still got some pencil, so I think I'm going to first erase the pencil before I go into that with water. And any other pencil marks that you still have left, you can just erase those out if you see them, you know, otherwise you just leave it, you're not too stressed about that. Yeah, there were still pencil marks, but it doesn't bother me. I can't actually see them, so I'm quite happy with that. Actually very happy with the way this particular one has come out. Okay, so I'm just going to look at the beach area quickly. You can't just have the boat with the pen and ink detail without having something in the sand as well. Otherwise it doesn't look quite right. But we're not going to put a lot in. Just a little bit of texture perhaps in the sand, close to where the boat is. This is sort of where the seaweed is. You can also paint this in if you want to. You could use your reference as a guidance, or you can just sort of play around and do your own thing as well. Another way you can actually add texture to the sand is you can do a wash, and then you can actually sprinkle some fine salt over it, and it'll give you almost like a crystallized sort of feeling, a sandy sort of effect. So you can also go that route as well. You can see how that sort of grounds the boat. Doesn't look like it's just been stuck on. You can also go back into this if you want to and actually add a little bit of dark shadows into the sand, you know, as it is in the actual reference itself, but that's entirely up to you. But I quite like it just like this. I think this works for me. what I'll probably do is put a little bit of shadow underneath these. Not shadow, so to speak, but not just the pen and ink, almost like that over there. It actually looks quite nice with a little bit of darkness to it. So I think I shall do that over there just now. Let me first put all this in and then decide. I'm just going to do a little fine stippling here and there. Just bring a little bit of texture into that sand there. They have a bit of a darkness underneath that to work on top of, you know, because if you've got something lying on top of the sand, it's going to create a sort of a shadow underneath it. It's, yeah, just. Okay, that's it. And it's done. Maybe not. I didn't mean to put that in before I signed, but that's fine. Just quickly put some of that in there. That's it. Okay, cool. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Till next time, cheers.